Hello, today I want to talk about zero latency recording, specifically vocals, but it can be anything, with a high buffer size. So for example, you've recorded a track, you've got loads and loads of things going on, you've got loads of plugins which are all very processor heavy, and to keep them going you need to raise the buffer to make sure it's getting enough power. The problem with that is when you want to overdub some vocals or a guitar or something, you need to bring the buffer right down so you don't get the latency. Not very good when you're kind of right at the end of a track and you don't want to have to freeze the tracks or bounce everything out and just make it a smaller session. Or maybe you've done a big fat mix and now you're having to overdub additional parts. Very annoying, but it might have to happen sometimes. Well, I'm going to show you how to do that, how to record this at zero latency. I'm going to be using a Universal Audio Apollo, but this process will also work with any interface which has an onboard mixer with at least one virtual channel. If that's something you want to know about, stick around, here it comes. Okay, now the first part is the initial setting up in your Apollo. As I said, this will work with other interfaces, but you'll just have to take note of the process and then essentially translate that to your interface. But we're looking at the Apollo for today. Now, the first thing is to make sure that you have enabled your virtual channels. I have mine enabled already anyway, but if you haven't, let's just double check. If you go to settings, hardware, and then over here, make sure you have some virtual channels on. You can have 0 or you can have all of them. There we go. So I've gone for all of them. Fantastic. And then they appear in your mixer just down here. Okay. And it's one of these virtual channels which we're going to be routing the DAW into. So let's say we're going to use this first one. I'm going to rename that DAW and just make a note of which channel it is that you're using. In this case, on my Apollo, I think it's going to be known as channels 5 and 6, but it would often be labeled virtual channel. So in this case, virtual channel 1 and 2. Now that is the initial part that you need to do. The next part is to do the routing within the DAW. What I'm going to do now is show you how to set that up in Logic and then Pro Tools. So if you're using either of those, you can just choose which chapter suits you the best. If you're not using either of those, then just watch the next one, the Logic one, and there should be enough in there to help you transfer that to your DAW of choice. Okay, so here we are in Logic. We've got a whole bunch of tracks here, got a whole bunch of plugins going on, and I'm going to presume that you have things set up in the default way. Now, all you need to do is you need to send what's going to your stereo out, to your main left and right. You want to send what's going to that to the virtual channel that we have on the Apollo. So to do that in Logic, go up to Mix, IO Assignments, and then here we go, we've got one tab called Output, and in the output, this is your stereo out. As you can see, I've already set mine. Yours will probably be set to the first output, for example. This is where you need to set that to your virtual channel. So virtual 1 and 2. There we go. So just to confirm that that's coming in the right place, I'm going to turn it on and then have a quick look at console. And there it was, you just saw that kind of blasting, but that was coming in on a virtual channel, which I labeled DAW. If you're using a different DAW and it's not going to be Pro Tools like I'll show you next, then you need to just find a way to do the same sort of routing that I did here. If it's not possible to do, I'm sure it is, but if it's not possible to do, then the other option is you can just route everything which is going to the stereo out, route that to a bus or like an aux channel, and then set the output of that to that virtual channel on the Apollo. Next up will be the Pro Tools routing, but if you don't need to see that, then just skip to the following chapter. Okay, so here we are in Pro Tools with loads and loads of tracks, loads of plugins going on. And now all you need to do is you need to route what's going to your main output. I'm going to presume that you just have this set up in the default way. You need to route your main output to the virtual channel on the Apollo. Now you could change everything in the outputs here, but that's a long way of doing things. Let's go up to Setup and then your IO Setup and then go over to the output tab, and this is what you want to change. 1 and 2 needs to be feeding virtual 1 and 2 or whatever virtual channels you chose. In my case, it was virtual 1 and 2. So let's do that. We also then need to move the original one out of the way. So what I do is I just swap them over. You can also disable it, but let's just do that for now. Okay. And now everything which is going to that main output, which was main output 1 and 2, is going to be going to the virtual input on the Apollo. So I'm just going to hit play and then let's just see if that's happening. Lovely. So that seems to be working correctly. Now we're going to go back over to console and do some further routing. All right, now we're back in console, and there's just a few more things that you need to set up, and then we'll be good to go. Now, we've already checked that we've got a DAW coming in on a virtual channel, so that was just coming in here. Fantastic, or whichever one you've chosen. Next up, let's just see which channel you're going to be coming into on your interface to record, in this case, vocals, but it can be pretty much anything really, but we're doing vocals. I've got one coming in already. This is on a digital input, but you can be using analog input or whatever you're using, so let's just rename that, call that vocals. It's good to be tidy. And this next step is really important. Let's go over to the Q outputs, and this is where you set what is going to be sent to your headphones. Now, in this case, I'm using a headphone output, but you might also have it set up to use a external headphone amp. So it's coming out of different line outputs on your interface. That's totally cool too. For example, in this case, it could be lines 3 and 4, like you see here, in which case just choose whichever one you're using. And this is what you need to do. So you need to make sure that the mix is off. So if I'm using headphone output, make sure the mix is off on that. If you're using one of the line outputs, make sure the mix is off. That means it's going to be taking what's going to the send instead of what's just going to the overall mix of the Apollo. Again, if you're using a different interface, the same rules will apply here. Okay, now let's go over here and we'll start with the headphone output. So these are the sends to the headphone output. Let's just open that up. And this is where you set up your headphone mix and you choose what you want to hear. So make sure you have the DAW up, because this is where you're going to be listening to everything from Logic, Pro Tools, or whatever DAW you're using. And then have the volume up on your vocal as well. So in this case, that's that channel there. And then if you're using an external headphone amp and it's coming out of one of these line inputs, then it will be the same thing, but just one of these sends instead. So in the same regard, that's my DAW. Let's put that up. And this is a vocal. Let's put that up. Fantastic. Now that's good to go in your Apollo. Now the very last step is just one last part in your DAW. So in this particular case, it's Pro Tools. And what you need to do is you need to disable software monitoring. Now Pro Tools doesn't really have that as a setting really. So in this case, if this was a vocal that I was recording, this is our vocal channel, all I would do is either pull down the volume or just mute the channel. That's essentially the same as software monitoring. If you're in Logic, there'll be a little button up here, or you can do it from the settings. But whichever DAW you're using, there should be an option to just turn off the software monitoring, or if it's like Pro Tools, just bring down the level of the track that you're recording. Now, what this means is when we start recording within your DAW, you're going to be monitoring the DAW through the Apollo or whichever interface you're using. You're going to be monitoring it through that. And also you'll be monitoring the track that you're recording, in this case, vocals, through that as well. So that means that you can have the buffer nice and high. You can have it on 1024 or whatever it is, if you like, or double that, whatever the highest one you have, you can have it as big as you like. And it's not going to make a difference because it doesn't have to come into the DAW first and be sent back out to you. So you're not getting any latency at all. You're doing all of the processing on the interface. And that is it. I've showed you how to do it with an Apollo, but it should work with any interface which has an onboard mixer and at least one virtual channel. Now, if you want to go a little bit deeper into recording vocals with an Apollo interface, I've got another video which I did a couple of years ago, which has actually been very popular, which takes things a little bit further and gives you a nice setup with your vocal to try and get it sounding sweet and to get it recording well and sounding good in your ears. So go and check that out if you're interested. I'll go and put a little link up there for you now. But anyway, if you've got any questions, just let me know. I'll try my best to answer. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Stay creative.